Welcome to this Foxy production. This is the first episode of 3 that we have recorded, discussing our decisions and the process of buying and moving onto a narrowboat. In this episode, we talk about the how and the why.
So here we are, sat in the saloon living room of our narrowboat. There is a dog at our feet, asleep. He may make some noise. It is a very hot summer's day. It's not technically summer yet, I think it's still spring. But it's a very warm day. The doors are open. The hatch is open. The stern doors are open. The fans are on, you might hear that, if I can't filter that out. You might hear some outside noises. You might hear some dog noises. But this is a little podcast about our narrowboat and our journey on our narrowboat for almost the last year. I think it's been about 10 months. Over a year since we purchased the boat.
Is it?
Well, we started it in June. I had a memory show up. No, I was looking at something and... Oh, it might be because it's evening on the lawns at work. And last year's evening on the lawn at work was the night before. And the next day we went to look at our very first narrowboat. That was one at Pear Tree.
Yeah.
So it might not be exactly a month. It might not be exactly the same date in June, but it's
close enough
to the weekend, most likely. So it's been about a year pretty much since we've been actually looking to live aboard a narrowboat.
Wow.
And we picked up this boat, Foxy. We picked this boat up in August, I think around the 20th, 19th. I'd have to look at the photo. I think we landed in the marina on the 23rd.
Yeah.
Took us 4 days, so we must have picked it up on the 18th or the 19th. Because I don't know if I'm counting the Friday in that journey when I say 4 days. Because we arrived on Tuesday, Monday, Saturday, Sunday. Yeah, so it must have been 18th of August, I think. It's when we actually paid the final bill, topped up the diesel, put all of our stuff in it, handed the keys, and set sail. Well, you don't sail a narrowboat, but you chug along on a narrowboat. And how far did we go?
Not far at all.
Didn't go far at all. We stopped basically 5 minutes after setting off. To be fair, it was like 4 o'clock in the evening on a Friday, and the first locks were just around the corner, and there were 7 of them. And we still had yet to fully research how to operate a lock.
Yep. I remember going on a bit of a recce that night. So we went out for dinner and then we went for a walk along the towpath to try and have a look at some locks, see if we could work out how they worked, how to operate them. And we actually got lucky enough that there was a hire boat that was coming through. Yeah,
which was quite unusual because we'd eaten at this point. We'd gone out for a meal and we had eaten. So this was like 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, like quite late at night when, yes, it was light and the weather was fair, but people generally don't cruise this late because if you struggle to find somewhere to stop, you could be cruising for another hour or so. But yeah, someone was coming along and then there was like 2 people on the boat and 2 people along the towpath.
Yeah, it was a family that they had regularly hired narrowboats and been on narrowboat holidays. And they were just coming up through the locks. So we stopped the 2 of them on the towpath and were like, hey, we've just bought a boat. We've got to go through a lock. Can we watch how you do it? And they were like, yeah, that's fine. So yeah, that's how we kind of learned how to do a lock, by watching some hire boaters.
Yeah, watching some people operate a lock after we had already bought our own. In fairness, we had done a lot of research beforehand. You know, everyone does the Google how to operate a lock and read all the, read the guides on the CRT website, the hiring websites, the Wilton Marina. They've probably got a guide or something. And there's many YouTubers who have shown this is how you operate a lock, this is how you operate a staircase lock, and all that kind of stuff.
It's very different watching or reading about it and then actually having to operate it yourself. Yeah, and I remember when we set off the next morning being absolutely terrified going up to that lock. But we were quite fortunate that
It was a
Again,
Saturday.
It was another hire boat that we were
Yeah.
paired with, who it was their first day out and
Yeah.
their first lock as well. So we kind of got through it together. But it was an interesting experience.
Yeah. So how many locks did we go through? I think it was 15 on the way down. There was 7, and then 1 at...
Location data removed.
And in our other journeys, we've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, that's 4 locks, but in both directions. So we've done 8 lock journeys plus 15, that's 23. And I've done 1 of the locks. I technically am not sure I could operate a lock at this point, despite having driven a boat through, like I say, 23 of them. But I'm sure it's easy. You just drop the pedals, don't you?
It depends on which way you're going.
I was being sarcastic. Don't drop the pedals; they might break.
Yeah, it depends on which way you're going.
Yes, go on, expert lockstress. Let the folks listening. How do you use a lock?
You're asking me, like, I can't remember the last time we went through a lock.
So going down a lock, right? I've pulled up. I've dropped you off, and I'm waiting impatiently for you to get the top gate open. And the lock itself is empty. There's no water in it. What are you doing?
Well, you've got to open the paddles to let the water in.
Isn't there another step before that?
Or you need to make sure both gates are closed.
Yeah, and the bottom gates.
Well, yeah. So you need to make sure that the gates on both sides of the lock are closed.
Yep.
Because otherwise, you're going to let in a load of water and it's not going to fill the lock. It's just completely pointless.
Yeah, and you might empty a pound and everyone's mad at you because there's no water.
Yeah, basically. So, you make sure the gates are closed, you open the paddles to let the water in, you let the water level stabilise. You then, depends on the order you do it, but you can then open the gate to let the boat in, close the paddles, close the gates, and then you empty the water to bring the boat down if you're going down. And then once it's, again, the levels have equalised, you open the gates, boat goes off, you close the paddles, close the doors, and off you go.
Right, I need to clip that, and next time we go to a lock, I should probably actually operate it. Because conversely, Jen's never driven the boat through the lock either, which in itself is an experience, especially going down the lock, because you can sink your boat going up a lock and down a lock, but it's easier to sink it going down because there's something called the sill, which is basically the end of the previous canal. If any part of the boat is on that as the water level goes beneath it, then you end up with a Pythagoras theorem where your boat is one side of a triangle at completely the wrong angle, and if it goes too far you might even get the front of the bow under the waterline and actually sinking the boat, which has happened, and you will find plenty of pictures of narrowboats that have done that. Going up a lock, it's not impossible, but it's harder to sink your boat. Usually the only way you're going to sink a boat going up is if any part of the boat snatches on a protruding brick ironworks or the wooden gates. So in both instances, it is a little bit of a dance where you are trying to keep the boat in the centre of the lock, not too far forward, not too far back, and just keeping an eye on the walls, because if there's 2 boats in there, you're going to be butting up against the wall. So that's just something you just got to kind of manage. And that's how it is when there's 2 people, one person driving and one person operating the locks. There's plenty of people who do it completely solo with very, very little help, and they have to manually do all the locks, and sometimes they'll get on the boat and drive it through, or they'll just hold the centre line and pull the boat through if it's set up enough to do so. It's incredible how some people, particularly people who've been boating for many, many years, kind of operate the locks. Sometimes in ways that the CRT don't necessarily approve of. You're supposed to open both gates of a double lock, but I think a lot of people will just open one and squeeze through and hope they don't hit the other one on the way out. These things are as they are. So what else happened on the way down? So it took 4 days. Mm-hmm. There was lots. It was quite sunny. It was like a low 20s, 20 degrees Celsius week. So sunny. We didn't have not a lot of rain. I think maybe one morning there was a little bit of rain, but nothing to be concerned about.
I don't think there was anything particularly of note about that first journey.
Other than the 15 locks and maybe the tunnel?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we went through a tunnel, a 3 kilometre long tunnel on day 2, I think. maybe day 3 of, it must have been day 2. Yeah, I think it was on the Sunday. We went through Blisworth Tunnel. It's because Braunston Tunnel's just round the corner, and I have to catch myself from saying the right one. But that's a very straight tunnel, so you can see both ends of the tunnel before you go in. And when we went through, there was a boat ahead of us. We thought there was a boat ahead of us, but not a boat coming our way. So we were quite fortunate because it is a double wide tunnel, and there could be a boat coming the other way, which I suppose is better than a single or a slightly narrower tunnel, as do exist, and having a boat coming the other way, or a tunnel with a bendy bit in the middle and a boat coming the other way. But we got through that with very little trouble. We just bounced off the sides a few times. It took about 25 minutes, I think, to get through there.
Yeah, it took a good 25 minutes. I don't think it was longer than half an hour. It was roughly as long as we predicted it would take.
Yeah. And if you don't know anything about narrowboating, there is a speed limit, and I'm not even sure we were doing that in a tunnel. The speed limit is 4 knots, which is roughly 4 miles an hour. I know the purists will probably say it's more complicated than that, but it essentially, it's at such low speed it doesn't really matter. And it's not really, the speeds aren't really dictated by a speed limit. It's more the impact you're having on the boats around you and the banks around you. So you don't want to have a wake behind you or a damaging wake behind you.
Yeah, because that can cause boats to unpin.
Yeah.
And we have seen boats, not necessarily on our journeys, but certainly just on walks around the canal.
Yeah.
We have seen boats that have come unpinned and are literally blocking the canal and stopping boats from being able to pass. It's more common than you think.
Yeah, it also, the more wash you have, the more erosion you cause to the banks. So you think, oh, I'm only one boat, but if you've got 100 boats in a single day doing 8 mile an hour instead of 4 miles an hour, well, that's going to have quite a bit of cumulative difference than if they were all doing 4 mile an hour, because we are talking about soil here, not like asphalt or anything like that the roads are made out of. Because one side is usually one side is kind of more built up, but the other side is almost never built up, and even the towpath side in places is just plant life. So and also, you're on a narrowboat, you're not supposed to be in a rush. We planned 4 days to do a 2-day trip, hoping to arrive we basically did arrive where we needed to on the Monday, but offices were closed, so we couldn't go to where we actually needed to be, so we hung around until the next day. So we've spoken about we've spoken about the maiden voyage. Should we go back a bit and start about why we bought a boat and how we bought a boat?
Yeah, I mean, might help give some context to the story as well.
So, how did we become aware of narrowboats?
Well, you were aware of them before I was. You had an uncle that lived on a boat for a while when you were younger, and
yeah, the first time I drove a narrowboat was, I don't know how old I was, maybe 6, 8, that kind of age. My dad and uncle and myself were out on the stern of the deck. The stern is the back, that's where you drive the boat from, where the tiller is and the accelerator. My uncle handed me the tiller, and my dad and my uncle just kind of went off inside for a few minutes, and there I was in charge of a boat with 5 people on it, 6 years old. Yep, so my uncle lived on a boat, and also I started working in a canal throughput town. Don't really know what you call it. A canal destination town? It's not really a destination, but just a town that was built along the canal, because many years ago there was industry in that town that the canal served, that the railway came along later and took away. So I became more aware of narrowboats sort of about 6 years ago now, like 2017 sort of time, and I don't know exactly when. Might have been earlier, might have been later, but we kind of also started learning about the tiny house movement.
Yeah, that was something you discovered before I did.
Yeah, something YouTube kind of started serving up to me was a YouTube channel called Living Big in a Tiny House, and that's just a channel where they visit lots of different types of tiny house living, which is, if you've not heard of tiny house, it's basically caravans but built to be homely and livable as opposed to holidayable. So you might go into a tiny house, which is basically a trailer with a shed on it, for want of a better description, but you go through doors and it's not a shed. This is a living room, this is a kitchen and a bedroom, and there's a stove for heating and water and a bathroom and all this kind of stuff, and it's small, it's compact, but it's a house, it's not a holiday place. In the UK we don't really have much in that way, just because the laws are a bit prohibitive against that kind of lifestyle. We definitely have van dwellers. Van life is a thing that's happening here, like stealth camping and all that kind of stuff. But primarily, if you want to live off-grid, slightly alternative, the best way to do that in a more legal way is narrowboating.
Particularly in the UK, like the tiny house movement is a lot more prevalent in Australia, New Zealand, and America and Canada,
where there's a lot more space and the laws kind of allow you to not have a residence and things like that. I mean, here it's mostly that if you have a tiny house, it has to be on a property.
It can't be the main dwelling on a piece of land. So because of planning permission regulations and the way that council tax works in this country, if you have a piece of land, it has to be a permanent dwelling, so it has to be all plumbed in and connect up to your sewage works and everything.
And that kind of defeats the whole purpose of it.
Yeah, basically, because the whole point of tiny living is that you're living in a much more eco-friendly way. You're living much more simply,
and you are kind of chasing lower cost.
Yeah, so there are different people get into it for different reasons. People get into it for a cost factor, people get into it for environmental reasons, people just decide they don't want the rat race, they don't want to be part of that whole 9 to 5 struggle, they don't want to be living paycheck to paycheck, they don't necessarily need all these things that society tells us that we need. And I know that was something that I got quite caught up with, and for me personally, if tiny living was accessible in the UK, I absolutely would be like, hey, let's do this. Unfortunately, land is also very, very expensive in the UK, so that means that really only people with money or property developers can buy land, or if you are fortunate to have friends or family that own a bit of land and that say, hey, you can park your trailer here, then that's the only other way around it in this country.
Yeah, pretty much.
So if you don't fall into those categories, it's not really an option, which is a shame, because I think it would certainly help with the current housing market situation.
Yeah. Whereas living on a narrowboat, it doesn't necessarily overcome all of those issues. However, it is a practice that's been around for 30 or 40 years as a socially acceptable thing, and even longer than that. I mean, realistically, hundreds of years. I mean, the canal network is about 300 years old. People have been travelling, working and living on the canal ever since it started. And I believe it's around the 50s and the 60s that leisure cruising and liveaboards started to become a thing. Mostly like holidays and recreational stuff, but not too long after that, people started deciding they could live aboard. I mean, particularly back then, you didn't have to worry about electricity because there wasn't really any. You just use gas for your cooking and gas for your lights, candles, that kind of stuff. It's probably a lot easier back then, although I'm sure the insulation and some of the build quality might not be quite as good as it can be now.
So that's how we kind of got introduced to the whole alternative living. So it was through the Living Big in a Tiny House channel. You then started watching Cruising the Cut.
Yeah, during lockdown. There was a similar channel to Living Big, is Exploring Alternatives, and they did a video with David from Cruising the Cut, and because I was already watching one channel, it got recommended. I'm vaguely aware of narrowboats, so I picked up on it and started watching it. That then meant his channel. I think for the next 3 weeks I kept seeing thumbnails of his videos here, his videos there, and I'm very adverse to picking up a new channel, especially if YouTube is trying to force it down my face. I'm like, I'm not watching it. Oh, I'm not watching it. I'm not watching that Outside Xbox. I'm not watching that Cruising the Cup. I'm not watching that, whatever channel it is. And then inevitably what happens is I discover the channel, watch a few videos, and then end up binge watching all the videos over the next few weeks or something. And that's basically what happened. Cruising the Cup, I like his video style. He's a slightly older gent. I think he bought his boat after a divorce. but he's kind of like he's from the Midlands in the UK. You know, he has a decent sense of humour that I can kind of vibe with, which I don't know why I'm admitting to that, but whatever. Every thumbnail has a decent pun, which I really enjoy. His channel is basically the life aboard narrowboat, and it's not really like a vlog like you would expect from like a younger generation. He does cruising vlogs, and his life vlogs aren't about his life, they're about his life aboard the narrowboat. So things like maintaining the engine, painting the roof, dealing with rust spots, replacing the electrics, getting a new solar panel fitted, these sorts of things. So it's not really about him, it's about his life on the boat itself, and what the boat demands, because, you know, something we've learned is that the boat demands things from you. And it kind of just started watching them, pinged a few to Jen. Oh, this is an interesting video. And then we started just watching them. There's a couple of other channels we started watching. Foxy's Afloat, Holiday Cafe Boat. And we're like, yeah, we like the idea of that. Maybe one day we'll save up, get a boat in 10 years, 15 years. Maybe we'll retire onto one or something. However, as we were in a rented accommodation at the time, after the pandemic had ended, there were some new electrical rules that came out, and it turned out the property we were in, it failed to meet those new regulations. So we were told that basically our lease had been ended early because the amount of work they had to do, which was a legal requirement, they couldn't not do it. It would be very disruptive to us if we were to stay there, in terms of, basically they were ripping the walls out to rewire the entire thing. 3 weeks of work, which we think it took them a lot longer to do, plus they probably did some other work. We were given about 3 months notice, which is more than you get normally. Like normally you get 30 days. So we actually had way more time to find a narrowboat than most people would. And because we knew like we could move out earlier, if the narrowboat that we found was available earlier, we could have moved out earlier. But we also knew that we didn't have to be out until the 29th of August, and we were out on the 27th. So that made it easier.
Thank you for listening to this episode. See you next week, where we talk about the buying process of a narrowboat.